Welcome to Comparing and Critiquing Holiday Films. I'm your host, Dan Burke. I'm the host of Words on Film on Boston Free Radio. So I'm not really used to being on TV right now, but it's a different experience for me, and we're on live, so that's added pressure right there. But it's great to be here, albeit in a difficult situation. But I'm here to talk to you today about holiday films. Since it is mid-December right now, and of course a lot of these are playing on TV and in theaters right now. And the first film on my list is actually a brand new film that's in theaters right now. And it's called The Grinch, which came out a couple of weeks ago. Are we good? Yeah, okay, great. We are good. So, The Grinch is a 2018 movie that is fully animated, very much like the 1966 Chuck Jones special, although as the 2000 movie starring Jim Carrey demonstrated, there's really no replacing that 30-minute special, but the 2018 Grinch comes pretty close. Interestingly enough, Benedict Cumberbatch is the voice of the Grinch, and he has an American accent for some reason, which I didn't think was entirely necessary for the character, especially considering that the iconic 1966 movie had Boris Karloff, who's British, doing the narration and also doing the voice of the Grinch. Plus, it's not as if Whoville is in American territory, for instance. So I'm not exactly sure why Benedict Cumberbatch donned an American accent, but that's what he did anyway. But in any event, the animation in the movie was very fantastic, especially making good use of CGI animated characters and set design. And it made Whoville look beautiful. Certainly a lot different than what they made it in the 2000 movie directed by Ron Howard and starring Jim Carrey. So I actually enjoyed the Grinch from Illumination Studios a lot more than I thought I would, and certainly a lot more than the other Dr. Seuss animated movies that it's come out with, such as Horton Hears a Who, which I thought was ultimately bland and also full of dated pop culture references that were dated almost 5 minutes after you left the theater, and also the Lorax, which I didn't see all of, but I could tell from some of the previews that it wasn't quite up to the same sort of standard that the animated special from the 70s was up to, for instance. But The Grinch certainly had its moments. In addition to the mystery of Benedict Cumberbatch having an American accent, I also didn't understand why voice actors like Rashida Jones and Kenan Thompson appeared to be voicing Caucasian characters. Granted, it is Whoville, but in the animated film, the 2018 version, there were Whos that were black and also those that were white, but the principal characters voiced by Rashida Jones and Kenan Thompson, both of whom are African American, appeared to be Caucasian, which I thought was less them not wanting to hire African American character actors and settling with what they had, and more them being afraid to put African American characters in this movie. So I didn't think that was a very good move on the animated Grinch's part, but overall, other than those grievances, I actually was pretty impressed with the movie. I did think it borrowed a little too much from the 1966 animated special, animated by Chuck Jones and featuring the voice of Boris Karloff. But for what it was, it fortunately did not inundate itself with pop culture references other than some of the more contemporary Christmas music that was in the movie. I think probably How the Grinch Stole Christmas from the year 2000, which, as I said previously, was directed by Ron Howard and starred Jim Carrey, was far guiltier of inserting dated pop culture references into its story arc. In addition to that, the Whos in Whoville that were heavily made up for that movie looked freakish. And I did actually like how the makeup team made up the Grinch. They made up the Grinch so well it didn't look like Jim Carrey. But Jim Carrey disappeared into his role both literally and figuratively, and he actually did a really good job. He also put on this amusing Scottish accent that made him sound like Sean Connery. But in addition to that, Jim Carrey puts a lot of energy into his performance, just like he does in every performance, comedic or dramatic. And I think that's really what sold the original How the Grinch Stole Christmas, or rather the 2000 movie that Ron Howard directed. And certainly you can draw comparisons between the one that came out this year and the 2000 version, but honestly, nothing compares to the original Chuck Jones animated special. That was only 30 minutes long, but it keeps becoming a perennial favorite ever since it first aired on TV. And it's certainly from where these two movies drew their inspiration, and it just knew that it was telling a very short story that took up about 30 to 40 pages in a book, but it knew how to pace its story better. It knew the timelessness of the Grinch story, and overall, it's just a much better movie. So for those of you who are just tuning in, you are watching a special presentation from Somerville Community Access TV, where I compare and contrast various not animated movies, but holiday movies that were in theaters, and 3 of the films on my list actually are in theaters right now. I just mentioned the Grinch from 2018. I compared that directly to the 1966 version, which is directed by Chuck Jones, which was fully animated, and I also compared it to the 2000 movie, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And both theatrically released movies kind of overdid certain aspects, but were overall valiant efforts. And I think I actually liked the 2018 version of The Grinch, which was released by Universal Pictures and animated by Illumination Studios, more so than the live-action version. So the next film on my list is another film that is actually in theaters right now, and it has nothing to do with The Grinch. It actually has to do with a classic story, or it's based somewhat loosely on a classic Christmas story, and that movie is The Nutcracker and the Four Realms. And this movie, I gotta be honest, I kinda hated. First of all, it deviated greatly from the original Nutcracker story, the one that you see in the ballets that had the music by Tchaikovsky. And I feel like this movie was made just so the filmmakers could save some music royalties on their music selection, because the Tchaikovsky Nutcracker suite is royalty free for those of you who are looking to maybe score some music. But in any event, I don't have so much of a problem with them deviating from the Nutcracker story, because after all, the original Nutcracker story is an impressive ballet with great music, yes, but the story, even though it's a legitimate story that has a beginning and a middle and an end, hasn't always been interesting to me. There's a girl who gets a nutcracker for Christmas, the nutcracker comes to life, fights off a bunch of mice, and then the girl falls in love with the nutcracker. That's it. And then people dance. To me, that's not a particularly interesting story. So I actually don't mind that the Nutcracker and the Four Realms took it and made it into something interesting. Unfortunately, they made it into a story that ripped off The Wizard of Oz, in addition to other stories where there is some sort of misfit that goes from her mild home life into this fantasy world. And the fantasy world that consists of the four realms in the story is actually pretty tacky. And one of the characters that is one of the owners of this one of the four realms is played by Keira Knightley, and she plays this fairy with cotton candy hair. And no, I'm not making that up. And I like Keira Knightley, but my God, her voice in this movie is like if you took Rita Rutner and strangled her. She had such an annoying voice. She was instantly an annoying character, and for that matter, the girl in this movie, whose name is Clara, who is the original girl from the Nutcracker story, is played by Mackenzie Foy. And I didn't hate Mackenzie Foy, but I also thought she was kind of bland, but not nearly as bland as the actor who actually played the Nutcracker soldier. That actor was named Jaden Fawora Knight, who is an African-American. He might not be American, but he's certainly a black actor, and I didn't have a problem with that. The problem I had with him in the movie is that he wasn't focused upon, even though the movie is called The Nutcracker and the Four Realms. So here you have this soldier who's not even made up to be like a nutcracker, and he's only in the movie for about 10 minutes. His character is not developed, his character is not interesting really to begin with, and that should have been the selling point of the movie. Some other weaknesses included the fact that Morgan Freeman, who is given top billing in this film, as well as a prominent spot on the marquee of this film, is only in the movie for about 5 minutes. I love Morgan Freeman. I wanted to see more of him. It was a very big mistake for the makers of this movie not to include him. So The Nutcracker and the Four Realms had some impressive special effects and very good set design. In fact, I actually liked what they did with the Mouse King. They didn't just make him this big, giant mouse or rat. They actually, in very creepy but very effective special effects, they took a bunch of mice, CGI mice of course, and had them all sort of roll together in this one giant mouse. I thought it was creepy, yes, but absolutely effective and a very impressive way of using special effects. Unfortunately, the story and the characters just couldn't keep up with the impressiveness of the special effects and the set design. And audiences apparently did not disagree with me here, because The Nutcracker and the Four Realms was a bomb for Disney. Granted, Disney's had a very good year with other movies like Avengers Infinity War and Black Panther, with just about every single Marvel movie. So they lost quite a bit of money on The Nutcracker and the Four Realms, but fortunately they've had other movies that have made billions of dollars at the box office that did not put Disney in the red. So I suppose that's something that you can take with you. Another movie that I'd like to discuss here is actually not in theaters, or at least it wasn't in theaters for very long, but it is available on Netflix, and that movie is The Christmas Chronicles. And this is a movie about a young girl and her brother who decide to spy on Santa. They stay up really late on Christmas Eve, they set up a camera, and they want to catch Santa actually in the act of delivering presents. And eventually one thing leads to another, and they find themselves sneaking onto Santa's sleigh and seeing how Santa Claus actually delivers all the gifts to the children of the world who celebrate Christmas in one night. It's actually a pretty inventive concept. Unfortunately, it does delve into some cliche territory when the kids actually end up botching Santa Claus's mission and have him accidentally crash his sleigh, putting Christmas at risk forever, or potentially. But we've seen this kind of plot before, especially in a lot of Christmas specials. One of the Christmas specials that comes to mind is the Rankin Bass The Year Without a Santa Claus, where Santa has a cold and is potentially at risk for not delivering toys to kids at Christmas. We've seen it in that special. We've seen it in a bunch of other specials. But what makes this particular movie, the Christmas Chronicles special, is the depiction of Santa Claus by Kurt Russell. And that's probably one of the biggest takeaways of this movie. I did like the kids in the movie. There's Judah Lewis, who plays the teenage boy, and there's also Darby Camp, who plays the young girl. I liked them both, but I especially loved Kurt Russell because he kind of took the family-friendly part of him that we've seen in countless Disney movies. I can't even think of some of the Disney movies he's been in, but you could probably look it up on IMDb. But he also takes some of the tough guy roles he's played, especially Snake Plissken from the Escape from New York and Escape from LA movies. Granted, he's not as explicit as Snake Plissken, but he just kind of irons off sort of the rough edges of Snake Plissken and combines both his family-friendly nature as well as his tough guy image that he's had in a number of films, and combines them very well in this film. Another highlight of the Christmas Chronicles that I really liked is when Santa Claus, played by Kurt Russell, ends up in jail, and he is trying to spread Christmas cheer. And it sounds kind of cheesy when I describe it, but he has a number of the people in the jail cell with him actually play along to the song Santa Claus is Back in Town. There's a big orchestra, there are guitars, there are drums, there are even some street girls who are backup singers. And I thought that scene worked especially well, particularly since you have a cameo in that scene by Steven Van Zandt of Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. I thought that scene worked extremely well. And the one other thing that kind of irked me about the Christmas Chronicles is the name. They could have had a far more original name than the Christmas Chronicles. In fact, when I hear Chronicles, I think of an anthology series, as in a movie like The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is another Netflix film that I recommend, by the way, that is more 4 to 6 short films all put together. That's what I think of when I think of Chronicles. I wouldn't necessarily think of one continuous story about kids discovering Santa Claus. But this movie was pretty special for what it was, and as I said, Kurt Russell was really good as Santa Claus, taking something that I don't think any other actor who's played Santa Claus before, such as Tim Allen or Tom Hanks, has given to the role, and certainly brought something new to it. So Christmas Chronicles is out on Netflix right now, and by the way, Netflix is not paying me to say that. I'm just telling you that it's not out in theaters. You can find it on Netflix. It will probably stay on Netflix for a very long time, even after Christmas, but I do think it's worth checking out. So the 3 main films that are out right now that are brand new, and I'm not including any Hallmark or Lifetime movies, are The Grinch, The Nutcracker in the Four Realms, and The Christmas Chronicles. The Christmas Chronicles and The Grinch, I think, are worth checking out. On my show, I usually have a rating system, and it's 4-tiered. Knockout, checkout, strikeout, flunkout. A knockout means that a film is great and you should absolutely go out of your way to see it. A checkout means that a film is good but has some evident flaws. A strikeout means a film has a few too many flaws to recommend, although some noteworthy things. And a flunkout means film is terrible, you absolutely should not see it. The Grinch and The Christmas Chronicles, I would rate a checkout. Both of them have particularly evident flaws in storytelling as well as maybe some casting when it comes to the Grinch's part, but overall they are enjoyable films, and I might be wrong about them and they may end up being Christmas classics. The Nutcracker in the Four Realms I would list as a strikeout. The reason I didn't list it as a flunkout is because it actually has very good special effects, great set design. I suppose the story was a little creative, but when you have the Nutcracker in the title of the story and you don't utilize the Nutcracker character, that's your first biggest mistake. So I can't recommend the Nutcracker in the Four Realms. But there are countless other Christmas stories that are out now, obviously not in theaters, but certainly on TV and available to rent or stream, that are definitely worth checking out if you haven't already. And a lot of these names that I'm going to put out are, of course, classics. It's a little cliche to say that It's a Wonderful Life is a highly recommended Christmas movie, but it is. I mean, honestly, I cannot go through a holiday season without watching that film from beginning to end at least once. As a matter of fact, when I in a couple of days, I'm going to be checking that movie out on the big screen at the Brattle Movie Theater, as they show that film on the big screen every year. It's an amazing film, not just an amazing Christmas film. It's just an amazing film that happens to take place at Christmas time. And it makes you think. I think just about every time I see it, even though I know the progression of the movie from beginning to end at this point, every time I see it, I still get something new from it. And the way I see it as an adult is not particularly the same as the way I see it as a kid, or the way I saw it as a kid, I should say. Particularly now that I'm grown, I'm 36 years old, and I've certainly had some dreams come true, being on the air is one of them, as well as some dreams that haven't quite come true yet. I can certainly relate to the feeling that George Bailey has of life not quite turning out the way he wanted or expected it to turn out. And of course, there are some melancholy feelings when it comes to that. I think everyone can relate to that in one way or another. And also, George Bailey is given, of course, the gift at the end, which has been parodied and analyzed hundreds of times over, parodied in various TV shows, and I can think of 3 right off the top of my head from which it's been parodied. But it's interesting to see how much impact one person has on the society around them without them realizing it. Now, I certainly would never wish that I was never born, but I would certainly like to see, maybe even for a couple of hours, what the world would be like if I wasn't born. You know, of course, I want to come right back to being me again and hosting this show. That's fantastic. But I would like to think that if I were never born, Somerville Media Center would be in shambles. They wouldn't know what to do with themselves, Boston Free Radio wouldn't exist, and it would be all because of me. I'm kidding, of course. I mean, of course, I am just emphasizing that It's a Wonderful Life brings out a number of emotions, and it is quite ironic that when It's a Wonderful Life came out in theaters, it wasn't so much of a critical success, and commercially, it actually bombed. And it didn't actually create a following until the 1980s, when it was put in the public domain and was shown on a bunch of cable access stations like the one you're watching right now, SCATV. And so it's really refreshing to know that a movie like this can not succeed when it first comes out, and then eventually it will create a cult following that will eventually turn into a beloved classic. And that's what I really enjoy about It's a Wonderful Life. Not only its story, but also its legacy. And while it is cliche to say that it's a holiday classic, it is a very well-deserved recognition of such a great movie. And one of the very few movies, by the way, that I've seen more than once. As a film critic for the show I host on Boston Free Radio, Words on Film, I see a vast majority of the films I review once. And there aren't many films to which I go back and watch again, but It's a Wonderful Life is one of them. I suppose in the holiday season, Home Alone is another one of them, and unfortunately I didn't put Home Alone on my list. But I am actually going to delve into another movie that is a classic. Particularly, it's based on a classic story that has been remade several times. And the first version of the story, which is, in case you didn't guess, A Christmas Carol, is the one from 1951, which is not the first one that's been put on film. As a matter of fact, it's probably maybe the 10th one put on film. I don't quite know. But it is actually considered to be amongst the best. I don't know if it is amongst the best, but certainly Alastair Sim as Ebenezer Scrooge turns in what I believe to be the best performance by any actor to play Scrooge. I think that Alastair Sim not only has the look of Ebenezer Scrooge that Charles Dickens may have had in mind when he was writing A Christmas Carol, but Alastair Sim also is believable as a crotchety old coot in addition to, gradually as the film progresses, somebody who believably becomes redeemed by being visited by the three spirits. Also, because the film is in black and white, it emphasizes how some of the spirits, especially the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come, how scary they might be. And I don't think any other film or any other adaptation of the Christmas Carol up to this point has made the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come quite as scary as the 1951 version here. But again, I think what makes it even scarier is Alastair Sim's begging for forgiveness in the end, seeing his name in the gravestone, and I know it's a little bit of a spoiler, but finally, ultimately redeeming himself. But there is actually a colorized version of A Christmas Carol, the same one from 1951. My advice is don't watch it. Colorization was something that became commonplace for black and white movies, or certain classic black and white movies, beginning in the 1980s. There were companies that used computer technology to color in the cells of black and white movies, and because of this, movies like the 1951 version of A Christmas Carol, It's a Wonderful Life, and Miracle on 34th Street received colorized versions. But there were old-time actors like Jimmy Stewart and Katharine Hepburn, who were still alive in the 80s, who actually called for a public boycott of these colorized movies. And the boycott worked to a certain extent, but there are colorized versions still out there of the movies I just mentioned, like It's a Wonderful Life and A Christmas Carol. But if I were to give you any advice, of course you could watch whatever movies you want, however you'd want to watch them. I would say stick it out with the black and white version, because a lot of people these days, particularly millennials, aren't open to watching black and white versions of movies because they're too dark or they're too boring, allegedly. But I think it really takes a lot of patience with black and white movies to really watch them all the way through. But I do think that the 1951 version of A Christmas Carol is one of those movies that younger people might not be acutely tuned into when they first sit down and watch it, be it with their family or if they're turning it on TCM, because I don't think people would actually seek out this movie on streaming. I wish they would, but they probably wouldn't. But give this movie a chance if you're a younger person, and I guarantee you 10 minutes into it, you won't want to stop watching it. That's the effect that a lot of really good black and white movies have. The colorized movies that I've seen that are worth watching, and this is getting a little off topic from holiday films, but of course this is unscripted and I could pretty much say whatever I want within FCC guidelines. There is a colorized version of Reefer Madness, which is a propaganda film against the alleged dangers of marijuana. That's probably the only black and white film that I've seen that actually is worth watching in color, particularly because the people who colored the cells actually had the marijuana smoke different colors, green, purple, and it looks really cool. But in addition to the 1951 version of A Christmas Carol, there's another version of A Christmas Carol that I love, particularly because I was 10 years old when this movie came out. I actually saw it in theaters, and this one has stayed with me. I do still stand by my assertion that Alastair Sim is the best actor to have ever portrayed Scrooge on screen. The second best actor, and this is probably based on nostalgia, is Michael Caine. Because Michael Caine not only acts really well in the role, and like Alastair Sim, is scary before the ghosts come to visit him, but also heartbreaking during his visits of the three ghosts. He also has to act alongside most of his fellow actors who are made out of felt, literally. And not a lot of other actors could do it as convincingly as Michael Caine. And there were a lot of other actors up for the role of Ebenezer Scrooge for The Muppet Christmas Carol from 1992, but I don't think any actor could have done it as well as Michael Caine. And I also have to state that There are movies that make me cry. Some of them I'm a little ashamed to admit, just a little bit. But The Muppet Christmas Carol is one of them. The scene that always gets me every time is the scene where Scrooge has a girlfriend in his past whose name is Belle, and they're engaged to be married, but he keeps on putting off the wedding. And even though this scene has been depicted in just about every other version of A Christmas Carol, on stage and on screen, the one in The Muppet Christmas Carol, which ironically doesn't feature any Muppets in it, is one of the most heartbreaking, particularly when Belle starts singing the song, When Love Is Gone. Now, this song was actually not included in the original theatrical version of The Muppet Christmas Carol because the director, Brian Henson, who is the son of Jim Henson, thought that it would slow down the pace of the story and kids would get anxious. I think he was incorrect in that assertion, but it certainly would have put a lot of people in tears. It puts me in tears every time I see that scene. And the part where the older Scrooge, played by Michael Caine, sings along with Belle, oh my God, that is so sad. That is one of the saddest moments in cinema that I've ever seen. And the other films that make me cry, in case you're curious, are Born on the 4th of July, The Land Before Time, and, oh shoot, I think probably Forrest Gump would be in there. So, yeah, there aren't many scenes that bring me to tears, but I think those scenes, or those particular movies, scenes within those movies, give me a pass. So, in addition to that one heartbreaking scene in A Muppet Christmas Carol, what really also makes The Muppet Christmas Carol special is that they stick to the book, the original Charles Dickens text, a lot more than you would expect a kid-friendly version to do. I've seen other animated versions of A Christmas Carol. There was one with Mr. Magoo that took a few too many artistic liberties, but then again, Mr. Magoo's Christmas Carol had the time restraints of 22, I should say time constraints of 22 or 23 minutes to make time for commercials, so that can get a little bit of a pass. But for the Muppets to actually stick to the script while taking some artistic liberties with some lines here and there, I think to make it still poignant while also having some hysterically funny scenes with Gonzo narrating the story as Charles Dickens and also Rizzo the Rat playing himself and having them be good comic relief, that's great. Plus, the Muppet Christmas Carol has some great original songs, albeit some that were obviously inspired by Beauty and the Beast. And if you actually look at some scenes from Beauty and the Beast played alongside A Muppet Christmas Carol, you can see there was some inspiration there, but the songs themselves were great, and they were actually written by Paul Williams. And Paul Williams actually has had several collaborations with the Jim Henson Company because he originally wrote the original songs for a Muppet Christmas special called Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas, which is a criminally underrated holiday special that aired on HBO in 1977. Then Paul Williams actually went on to write songs for the Muppet movie, including the Academy Award nominated The Rainbow Connection. So even though he didn't get nominated for any Oscars for his songwriting in A Muppet Christmas Carol, he was up against some very tough competition. He was up against songs from Aladdin, including the one that actually won, A Whole New World. He was up against some songs from The Bodyguard, which also came out that year. But still, the fact that people come back to this film, The Muppet Christmas Carol, each and every year says something about how special this version is. Not only how much Michael Caine sells it as Ebenezer Scrooge, but also how poignant the Muppets themselves are. I really liked Kermit the Frog as Bob Cratchit. Miss Piggy as Mrs. Cratchit had certainly some memorable parts. I think I also really liked Dr. Bunsen Honeydew and Beaker as the two charitable workers who come in to request donations from Michael Caine's Scrooge. That could have been a throwaway part, but that was a good casting choice in terms of the Muppets. But also, how could I mention the Muppet Christmas Carol without mentioning the ghosts themselves? First of all, they doubled the part of Marley. In the original Charles Dickens novel, there was one Marley, Jacob Marley, and the first line in the text was, "Marley was dead to begin with, as dead as a doornail." In this Muppet version, the line has been changed to "the Marleys were dead," because Jacob actually has a brother in this version named Robert, and the reason he has a brother named Robert is because the ghosts of the Marley brothers are played by Muppet fan favorites Statler and Waldorf, also known as the two old men in the balcony. And yeah, that's probably one of the biggest artistic liberties that the Muppet team took in bringing the Muppet Christmas Carol to the big screen and making it the movie that it was. But a lot of Muppet fans welcomed that change. And I also really liked how they made original Muppets out of the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. I especially loved the Ghost of Christmas Present, who's this large, full-body Muppet whose eyes and mouth were operated by remote control. He certainly embodied the spirit of the Ghost of Christmas Present as Charles Dickens wrote him. And I realize that I've said a lot about the Muppet Christmas Carol, but there is a lot of nostalgia that I'm feeling right now as I'm describing the movie to you, because it is really that special. It not only sticks to the original script or the original novella by Charles Dickens, but it also embodies the spirit of the Muppets, not just being entertaining, but also being close to characters for which you would care as a person. They might as well be real people, but they're a lot more interesting because they are Muppets and they have certain characteristics. So the Muppet Christmas Carol is, of course, one of my favorite versions of A Christmas Carol. I'd probably say it would be my all-time favorite if it weren't for the 1951 version, which, yes, is a little less accessible for children, but once children grow up and have the patience to sit through black and white movies, they will certainly appreciate the 1951 version in addition to the Muppet version from 1992. And I've mentioned a lot of classics here. I've mentioned new movies, of course, The Grinch, The Nutcracker in the Four Realms, and The Christmas Chronicles, all three of which came out this year. I also mentioned the classic Christmas movies. The ones, and by classic I mean not only are they old and a lot of people have seen them, but they're also films that people come back to again and again. Now, one of the films that's very much unlike that is one that I think is criminally underrated that actually came out in 2005. And that movie is Joyeux Noël, which is a little hard for American audiences to say, but for those of you who are well-versed in French, like most Canadians are, Joyeux Noël means Merry Christmas. And it takes place, Joyeux Noël, on the front lines of World War I in 1914. It's where the French, German, and Scottish soldiers are all on the same battlefield fighting for their country. Remember that the Americans were not involved in World War I in 1914. They came later in 1917. But Joyeux Noël tells the true story, probably with some artistic liberties, as most movies based on true stories go, about the French, German, and Scottish soldiers forming a truce for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And by their truce, it initially started out with a ceasefire upon which the generals of all three armies agreed. But what started out as just a ceasefire, as in nobody firing any weapons, started to develop into something a lot greater than ultimately the war itself. See, at first, there were these opera singers who were brought to the front lines to entertain the German troops on Christmas Eve. And they start singing a lot of holiday standards like Adeste Fideles, which is the Latin version of O Come All Ye Faithful. And eventually they find that they get a reaction from the other troops on the sidelines. So, without spoiling too much, eventually on Christmas Eve, the soldiers from all three platoons gather on the battleground and they perform or they participate in a church service. And that is a really moving part of the film, particularly when the opera singers begin to actually sing their Christmas carols. In fact, there is one opera singer in the movie who's played by Diane Kruger, who wasn't particularly well known to Western audiences when this film was released in 2005, but is pretty well known now in movies such as Inglourious Basterds. But in this movie, she might not actually be singing her parts, but she certainly acts well as if she's singing the part. And the singing in this movie, with me not being a particularly big opera fan, certainly moved me to tears, especially given the context of this movie. And I have actually given this DVD as a gift to various acquaintances and who have never even heard of the movie, let alone seen it. And they were as equally moved to tears as I was when I first saw the movie. And it's a movie that, as I said, came out in 2005. And when it did, around the world, it made $20 million on a $22 million budget. And as a result, as you can figure out, that movie was not a hit, even internationally. As a matter of fact, there are times where there are movies that come out in America and they don't do especially well. They don't make all their money back. But internationally, they do pretty well. They probably come out even. But Joyeux Noel was not one of those movies. Very much like It's a Wonderful Life, it received critical acclaim when it came out and was even nominated for Best Foreign Language Film. But it didn't initially hit the mark. But it was only later, when it came out on DVD, particularly in the US and Canada, that it developed more of a following, but in my opinion, probably not as much of a following as it should have. But it's up to critics like me, who are telling you, or advising you, I should say, to go see this movie. And you will be absolutely thankful. It's not a movie that's comic relief. I don't think there are any moments of comic relief, but chances are, and I do choose my words carefully, after you see Joyeux Noel, you'll be changed. You'll be moved, and this movie might actually change your life. And I don't say that about many films. And I think regardless of your religious beliefs, even if you're Jewish or Muslim, you'll certainly see this movie and probably be enlightened by the capabilities of magnanimity amongst even people who are fighting a war. And it's certainly something that a lot of people can learn from. So I've spoken a lot about these movies, particularly these 8 that I've showcased for this 1-hour presentation. And it's actually been really refreshing to come on here and speak to you candidly and without a script about these movies that I try to come back to each and every year and I absolutely love. Because that's one of the things that really gets me energized, just talking about something I love, which in this case is movies. And as a film critic, film critics get a lot of flack. They are compared to hecklers. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of people think that film critics do what they do because they hate movies. That they go into a movie and pick it apart and rate a movie as guilty until proven innocent. And that is certainly something that some film critics do. But that's not something I like to do. Of course, being a film critic can be difficult, and there are certainly moments where it feels like you're being a referee, where you're the bad guy. But the truth of the matter is that I review movies because I love movies. And I don't have any ambition to be a filmmaker necessarily, but I have enjoyed going to the movies ever since I was a kid, and I'm 36 years old, so when I was growing up, there was always a VCR in the house. But I do remember my parents taking me to my very first movie, which happened to be Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And remember, this was the 80s. This is when the Disney company kept releasing films into theaters over and over again and didn't quite get them out on video. But it was an amazing experience for me, and I have never lost that childlike excitement of going to the movies, and I certainly haven't lost the childhood excitement of talking about movies. Maybe that's not exactly a childhood thing, but for me, I enjoy it, and I hope that you have enjoyed listening to me as well. And there are various complaints about creativity and censorship that have come about when it's come not so much to movies, but definitely when it comes to certain songs. Like, for instance, this year, 2018, was the very first year that a handful of radio stations across the country banned the song Baby It's Cold Outside. And interestingly enough, Baby It's Cold Outside is not actually a Christmas song. It's a song that debuted in the movie Neptune's Daughter, which was made in 1949 and starred, amongst other people, Ricardo Montalban and Red Skelton. And the song was sung by two different couples. At first, it's sung by a man to a woman, as in the man is the wolf and the woman is the mouse. And then it's sung again, this time the woman being the wolf and the man being the mouse. And it's a little difficult to explain what the difference between the two is, but when you think of a wolf and a mouse, you can certainly tell, if you're familiar with the lyrics, which part is which, with the wolf preying on the mouse and so on and so forth. And that comparison right there, in addition to the recent Me Too movement, has placed a stigma on Baby It's Cold Outside that is not inappropriate considering the times we live in, but I do think it is apt to be misunderstood. And I do think that, first of all, I don't think the song should be censored, but I can understand why people are upset by it. But at the same time, if you actually go back to the movie Neptune's Daughter and see the movie in the context, as well as lines like, say, "What's in this drink?" in the context of the film, as well as the times in which they were filmed, which was, of course, this was 1949, so the role of a woman was vastly, I should say, different than what it is now. In terms of her expectations, staying overnight with a man, that was a lot more taboo then than it is now. And I don't think, especially in the context of the movie, that the alleged or implied date rape is particularly valid. But I don't believe that songs like these should be censored. I think that they should be put into context. And certainly when it comes to a movie like Neptune's Daughter, and also showing that a song like Baby It's Cold Outside is actually not a Christmas song, is a pretty good start for seeing the song for how it was originally intended to be written. And again, also showing that it's not just a man preying on a woman, and certainly not in the way of any sort of perceived date rape or any other uncomfortable topic like that, and especially drugging someone. That's just not the point of the song at all. But in any event, it's really certainly something to think about during this holiday season. But there are also plenty of other holiday songs that are enjoyable without stirring up controversy. There are other songs that actually are not related to Christmas that are still favorite holiday standards, like Jingle Bells, like Winter Wonderland, that are unlikely to stir up any controversy to this day, or at least I don't think so. But again, whether it's music or movies or taking certain forms of media that keep cropping up every holiday season, putting those into context, I do really hope that all of you enjoy your holidays. I definitely hope you see some good movies, but I also hope that you spend some quality time with family, friends, and other people that you care for and look forward to seeing during the holiday season. I also know that the holiday season can be quite stressful for a lot of people out there, particularly those of you who are doing a lot of cooking and shopping, not to mention wrapping. Wrapping is probably one of my least favorite things to do during the holiday season, but I've gotten better at it. But I really do hope that you have a very Merry Christmas. Those of you who are Jewish who are watching, Hanukkah is over, but I hope you had a very happy Hanukkah. And by the way, speaking of movies with holiday themes, I really hope that Hollywood makes a Hanukkah movie. If it's a movie about the Maccabees and their fight against the Greeks and also the Hanukkah miracle that took place, I think that would make an excellent movie. And I think that Jews and Gentiles with open minds could watch that film and absolutely enjoy it. And considering that there are a lot of Jewish people in Hollywood, it's amazing that they haven't made that movie already. So that's just a little bit of a suggestion, but as I said, I do say happy holidays, not because I'm afraid to upset people by saying Merry Christmas. I say it because there are people out there who do not celebrate Christmas, and the month of December is not just for the holiday of Christmas. Although that takes the majority, in fact, almost the entirety, maybe 99.9% of movies and TV specials out there. But in any event, I really hope that all of you out there have a wonderful holiday season. As I said, for my Jewish viewers, I hope you had a very happy Hanukkah. To those of you who celebrate Christmas, I wish you a very Merry Christmas. To those of you who celebrate Kwanzaa, maybe not at the exclusivity of celebrating Christmas, I wish you a very happy Kwanzaa. And of course, I'm looking forward to 2019, not to mention some of the great movies that are coming out. And being a film critic, I'm looking very forward to the Oscar season, which is probably one of my most favorite seasons in addition to Christmas. But let me just take this opportunity to say that my show, Words on Film, is on Tuesday nights from 1 to 2 p.m. and it's also on podcast form, so you can go on iTunes, type in Words on Film, and you'll be sure to find me. And I think that's pretty much all there is to say. It's been a thrill doing this show live. It certainly has taken a lot of getting used to, but I've really enjoyed myself. Thank you to the wonderful crew as well as the great people here at Somerville Community Access Television for putting me on for an hour. I've had a great time talking about movies. I've had a great time talking about the holiday season. Thank you so much for tuning in. And of course, a very Merry Christmas, a wonderful holiday season I wish to you, and a very happy and prosperous New Year. Thank you so much. My name is Dan Burke. Thank you for allowing me into your living rooms this evening.